Here I am with Tim Faulkner, the manager of the Australian Reptile Park. So how did the Australian Reptile Park start?
Well, we've got a really long history, and basically there's a man called Enviro Warrior, and Enviro Warrior had an interest in aquariums at the time, and on the Central Coast here he had a little aquarium, and through an odd chain of events, at that point snake anti-venom didn't exist, and he got into that through one way or another, and basically over the next few years he started to keep a collection of Australian animals as well as acquire loads of Australian venomous snakes, and they started sending that off to the CSL, which is the Commonwealth Serum Laboratories, and they began to make anti-venom. And so between the 1950s and 70s, anti-venom for tiger snakes, brown snakes, black snakes, taipans and death adders came online and was made. So through that process he started having people come and look at his animals, and that turned into a bit of a zoo, and the reptile park was then moved to Wyoming, which is close to where we are now, until 1996 when John and Robin Weigel, whom are now the park owners, they moved up here to Summersby where you and I are sitting. And we've had we still make anti-venom, or we extract the raw venom from snakes that goes into making anti-venom, but we're able now to run a zoo that a lot of people come and visit and have a good experience with, do conservation projects such as that with the Tasmanian Devils, and a good place for people to work and visit.
What's so special about the Australian Reptile Park?
Well, I like that we're a medium-sized zoo, and that means that on any given day, my job and a lot of the keepers here is really stimulating, because we're working with a range of species and we get to engage in some really cool projects. We do rely on visitors to come to the reptile park, and by visitors coming here and paying when they go through the front, that enables us to do things like our anti-venom program. We're the sole supplier of raw snake venom for the production of anti-venom in Australia. So very unique, and I think that's pretty cool. And then we have Devil Ark, which now has 150 Tasmanian Devils high in the alpine slopes of the Barrington Tops, and that's a conservation initiative that we funded initially and set up as a reward for the good work we do here and the wonderful day people have, and that's how we put it back into that conservation project that we really believe in. And aside from that, we make a lot of people happy every year. We're an entertaining zoo that sneak in the good old conservation message through our shows, and it's a wonderful place to work with a lot of happy people.
What are some of the endangered animals at the zoo?
Well, we really focus on some particular species. We like to do, let's say we're going to work with an endangered species like devils, rather than keep 2 or 3 just for an example of, we like to get 150. And then if we're going to engage in an endangered species like bilbies, we now have worked with the Bilby Fund, Save the Bilby Fund, and we keep some of their bilbies, and if we're successful and able to breed enough, we can return them back to their Charleville wild enclosure. And so we started with 6 bilbies, now we've got 10, and we like to sink into a few projects like that. So devils, bilbies, but other endangered species would be region honeyeaters, Galapagos tortoises, Komodo dragons, some of the iguana species. That would be a few of the most known ones.
Tell me a bit about your wildlife hospital.
Well, we don't really function here as a wildlife hospital like some other zoos might. We don't have the facilities for that. So we have a regular vet. His name is Pete Nosworthy, and he's a great vet. He's been with the park for 30 years. But basically, we keep a relatively small collection of animals compared to some other places. We've got some really iconic animals here, some that we love dearly, but we don't have the demand for a permanent vet. And in terms of hospital, we've got good carer networks on the coast with RSPCA, Wires, Wildlife Art, and if sick or injured animals turn up here, we have lines of communication where we can call people to come and pick them up in those organisations. So we don't have a big wildlife hospital like some others might.
Tell me a little about some of your conservation projects.
Okay, well, the one closest to my heart would be Tasmanian Devils. As I say, by visitors coming and supporting the reptile park, we're able to engage in projects like Devil Ark. So it's a really long story, and I'll try and keep it somewhat short. 1996, an amateur photographer photographed devils in the northeast of Tasmania. with big lumps and lesions on their face, and that turned out to be DFTD, which you know well about. So in 2003, a bunch of zoos and the Tasmanian government, the Save the Devil program was then formulated, got together, and we became a part of the captive component. So there's many things like disease control, what's happening in the wild, and our role is being a part of an insurance population that insures against if extinction happens in the wild, we've got a safety net, we've got a population. So as I said to you, after a few years, it became apparent that we need lots of devils. You know, if the species is going to disappear, it's no good having 10 or even 100 or 200. So it became apparent that zoos were doing everything they could, but had limited space. And so we conceptualised a big area that is something, you know, we keep devils here in an enclosure that's reasonably small, you know, like a quarter the size of the football field. And if you had them free range, would be like they're feeding and watering themselves. And so we wanted something between that, like a managed environmental enclosure. That means it's about the size of 6 football fields, and we have 14 of them. They're 3 hectare each, which is 6 footy fields. So we have 14 managed environmental enclosures, and basically the 150 devils now exists of devils that are pre-reproductive, too young to breed, devils that are reproductive, that are breeding, devils that have too many brothers and sisters and can't breed with anyone else, and devils that are retiring, that are too old to breed. And that makes up all of those enclosures. So, you know, in the Barrington Tops of New South Wales, it's away from Tasmania where the disease is, but it's just like Tasmania. It's high, 1,500 metres elevation. It snows a few times a year. And so that, for me, it's a world-class facility. There are species, it's the world's largest carnivorous marsupial. Everyone remembers the thylacine. We cannot let the devil go the same way. So that one's a really close one to my heart, and a very passionate cause.
Well, thank you for talking to me.
Oh, thank you for coming down, mate. You do some really good stuff, and it's nice to meet you and have you here.
Thank you.
I want to show you our venom program. It's not a conservation initiative, but if you're ever bitten by a snake out in the field, because you're out in the field a lot, guarantee the anti-venom you receive is going to be from one of these snakes' venom here. So let's go and have a look at that.
Okay.
Good on you, mate.